Welcome to Grey Matter Talks Tech, a podcast for dev and IT enthusiasts looking for tips and insights from industry experts. We cover various topics such as cloud technologies, dev tools, security and mapping. My name's Sam Barnes, Azure Solution Specialist at Grey Matter, and in today's episode, it's all about app modernisation. And I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Wilson and Will Pitt from Black Marble. Hi guys.
Hi there, Sam. Lovely to be here.
Hey, Sam.
Hey. So before we dive into the discussion about app modernisation, could you just introduce yourselves and tell our listeners a little bit about Black Marble, please?
Absolutely. So I'm the Chief Consultancy Officer at Black Marble. I work with a very talented team of consultants that help our customers get the most out of Azure and other areas that might be looking at from the software aspects. My role is all about enabling organizations to modernize, integrate, and optimize their systems, always with an eye very much on the DevOps best practices. But yeah, every day is a different day. It's a great place to be.
Hey, I'm William Pitt. I'm one of the very talented consultants that Andrew just referenced. And our expertise is definitely in the app modernization and integration space. So we have a great history in solving the kind of problems that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I guess my first question to you both then is, what's driving app modernization today? Why is there so much focus on it now? It seems a lot of businesses are putting a lot of emphasis in regards to app modernization.
Yeah, it is an interesting time. A lot of companies are working in the prospects of they needing business agility. They're needing a competitive differentiation. You know, back in the days, we used to say that every client, every customer that in their company and organization were a financial company or organization. Whereas now we are moving to a point where everyone's a tech company, and you have to have a technical differentiation, something that's going to put you out there, make you competitive. But you also then have to think about all the other aspects that come along with that. You know, the security, the cloud first mandates. You know, we fall in a place where the pace of change is exponential. It's how it is now is it's never been before. The markets have been evolving faster and faster over time, and the legacy systems just can't keep up. I was talking to a client the other day, and they've created a solution in 2007, and at the time it was the best of the best. It was put together with the best practices, and they couldn't design it any better. And to be fair, when you look at it, they couldn't have. But it hasn't kept up with time. So you're looking at a piece now where they want to make sure from a security and compliance piece that it sits well. But it can't. There's so many updates that it needs to go through that it might actually pose a risk. There's the one that clients are looking at for cloud adoption. How can they take more of that cloud native benefit like scalability and resilience? Customers and clients want to be in a position where their technical solutions drive the benefit for them, and it's getting them there. The other one that's really interesting is flipping on its head and going, you know what? A lot of developers don't want to work on outdated technologies. They like working on the modern aspects. I mean, that's always been the case though, right? But I'll hand over to you on that point, because it is an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when talking about outdated techs, I think a lot of our core infrastructures are still sitting on those outdated techs. If we're talking banking, it's COBOL and Fortran. So if you're a dev in those areas, there's big money there from the banks. But it shows the real cost of maintaining these legacy systems. It's not just the system itself, it's what it's residing on. It's the data centers, it's the people, it's the knowledge. And sometimes it's, as Andrew was talking about, the support available for them and your cyber essential insurances requiring certain standards. There's a good business case for having to continuously modernize.
That makes perfect sense. And I guess would you say that in terms of security and compliance, is that the only kind of thing to think about, or does app modernization support other key business outcomes that you can think of?
Absolutely. You know, it's not necessarily just even a cost driver. Now we're looking at things in the realms of speed, customer experience. The agility that a modernization can bring is really important to be able to bring in that third element, which is innovation. The speed gives you the agility, right? So you start putting in those DevOps practices, your CI/CD pipelines, you have a faster time to market. That's really imperative. It's really important. Then you can start looking at, well, now that we've got a solution that we can put out there really quickly, how can we then start delivering features, things like, the key customer experiences that are going to bring clients in to work with us, to be with us, to spend money with us. That's where we start channeling the enablement, but it can't stop there. If we stop there, we effectively building another legacy application that's going to have to be modernized in 5 to 10 years time, right? What we want is to deliver a solution that is innovation enabled. So it's taking hold of the cloud native architectures, the APIs, the rapid integration and iterations that you can put in there so that you can continuously change, you can enable further growth. Because look at the market in the last 5 years. We're constantly changing. You look at even from a framework and a language support piece. We've gone down to, in the .NET realm, down to a 3 to 6 month cadence, right? We are changing so rapidly. All of our solutions now need to have a similar review period. I've often taken a view on it in the realm of like a product and a service point of view, right? Product is something that you finesse and you hand out. It's back in the days, like, when you had a 3-disc installation, someone went out and they bought that, they installed it, and it was great. It gave you something awesome, right? But that's where it started. If you wanted the next feature, if you wanted something great on top, an innovative idea, you had to go and buy the next 3-set installation that would give you that on top of what was, right? What customers have been and clients have been conditioned to in the last 5 to 10 years, even 15 really, is that idea of we don't own solutions anymore. We subscribe to them.
Yeah.
It's a service. It's a thing that is continually delivering value. And that's what they want. That's what clients want. That's what we want to deliver. And so this really needs to be moving in the realm of how do we deliver something that we can continually improve on. I'll hand over to Will for any thoughts on that point of view. There's other areas like scalability and the like, but yeah.
No, 100%, because you were talking customer experience there, and we've seen, as time's gone on, the design preferences of I guess we call them customers or users, has changed massively. Hopefully everyone remembers the good old Word 2003, which was fairly basic, and now it's moved on to the more ribbon-styled, etc. We've had the new design languages from iOS and Android, and a lot of the things we've learned through those is you can't really have an ugly UI anymore. It turns customers off. It's one where if you see the blocky squares, you're thinking this is an old app, and it will set expectations on it. We know that currently that in the web world, a person will think a website is slow or software is slow in about 0.3 seconds of it doing something. So if you click a button and it takes longer than a second, people are going to think it's a problem with your app, even if it isn't. And so getting rid of those performance bits, if you can even jump forward a little bit in time, it really helps. Again, in the .NET world, going from Framework 4.8 to .NET Core, huge performance increases. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, it was in the realm of seconds of improvement, which really improves people's perspective of how your app is running. And in some businesses, time is money. And you want those performance bits. And, as you move forward, the languages have gotten easier to write, which enables that speed of innovation, the moving to market quicker.
Well, the point that I often, the catchphrase that I often say with clients is modernization isn't just about keeping the lights on anymore. It's about creating that headroom for the innovation. That innovation piece is the most critical. That's what prevents you from being in the same position in X amount of years' time, right? All the other aspects get you there, but if you can aim to be in a place where you can innovate, you're in a great place. That's almost like your gold plate. I've got to a point of my application is modern now.
100%. And in the cloud world, we have to keep moving to stay where we were. It moves so quickly, and you don't want to fall behind and suddenly see your entire application disappear because either the features are no longer there or you're no longer in support.
Sure, and it feels, I suppose, a balancing act as well, constantly between, as you say, delivering that consistent customer experience and then delivering essentially features, things like generative AI and stuff like that within applications, which seems to be everywhere now, right? So it's kind of that constant juggle of we need to focus on both elements of those, but we need to have a consistent platform to be able to do that from, right?
Absolutely.
100%. And it leans into what you're talking about. It's that aligning all teams in the business. It's that you want that direction from above and making sure that everyone's on the same page, because there has to be time to keep your product going, but you also need the new features to get those new customers to keep you in business.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually an area that I've kind of delivered when speaking to customers fairly recently as well, in terms of cloud adoption framework principles, having that cloud center of excellence mindset where you've got all business units represented within the team. And I guess that kind of making sure everyone has that conversation so that they can deliver a really good application for the end customer. And I guess that kind of brings us on to the next question I was going to ask you both, which is kind of, are there typical paths that you can choose for app modernization? I mean, I appreciate there are kind of rationalization decisions within the cloud adoption framework, and I'm assuming that's probably where you would start.
Yeah, absolutely. It's where we typically stand with that item is we don't come in with a clipboard. Clipboard exercises in this particular area don't often work well. What we tend to say is we'll do a whiteboard session, right? The approach in this particular area requires a little bit of finesse. It all depends on the business case, the technical debt, the desired outcomes, the available resourcing, at which point you put all of those in a bucket and you go, well, one size never fits all. So really what you have to do is you have to take that point of view of going, exactly as you said there, Sam, let's get everyone in a room, all the stakeholders. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. Let's remove the technical jargon. Let's make sure that we're aligned in a business faculty, right? We're trying to deliver business value. At which point, once you start having those conversations, you start then outline possible ways, or as you say, paths that you could go down in the modernization way. So things like, are we looking to just rehost this? Are we looking for that really quick impact? We just want a quick, low cost to implement, but we see value really quickly. And that's your lift and shift. It's fast, low risk, but it doesn't necessarily have the long-term benefit. Like I say, it's very, very much a quick aspect. You see a return on investment very quickly, but not to the extent you would do for a long term. At which point you start looking at other aspects. Well, what about refactor? So modifying parts of the application for the cloud. It's more work, but it has more value because now you start taking a little bit more of the native cloud attributes, the scalability, the security-minded aspects that you might get out of there as well. There are some instances, however, where as Will was saying, it was built in Cobalt. A rehost ain't going to do it, right?
Sure.
And refactoring that, because you might not have the original developer around to even understand it, and the tech team might not even be able to read it, to never mind refactor it. So you start then thinking about, well, this might be a case for a rebuild. I need to start from scratch. This is one of the highest value propositions, but it also has cost and time intensive sides to it, right? It's going to take you a long time to do, potentially. It's going to cost you a high amount, but the value is incredible, because it's not just the rehosting, it's not just the refactoring, you're delivering a new solution.
Sure.
So you can already start to put in the ideas for the innovation and such. The thing I always go about on this particular point, though, with rebuilding is, don't rebuild with in mind of what you already have. If you do that, you'll just rebuild what you have. It always happens. I've seen it so many times. The critical piece that's always missed is that no one sits down and does the requirements capture. They go, well, we've already got it. So they put through a lightweight requirements in design, because they go, we'll just reference what we have. But often there's two things that happen there. The developers assume lightweight. They don't develop all the features, or they just develop what's already there because they assume feature parity. And the stakeholders, those in the business who are trying to see business value and drive and revenue from it, assume feature rich. So what ends up happening is your developers start feeling demoralized because they keep getting new features and it's not matching the cost and the time to implement. And then they get bashed over the head going, why is it not there? That's the most critical piece when you come to a rebuild, is make sure that your foundation, your starting point, the plan, as it were, is solid. So everyone's in agreement. Put in what is my minimal viable product. Make sure that you've got your user stories in place. Everyone, again, it's coming back to that point of everyone's in the room, all your stakeholders, all in agreement. You know where you're headed. You know what you're driving for. It's so imperative.
I can't tell you how many times we've heard the answer to the question of, okay, so why do you need this particular feature, was because the old machine did it this way. And sometimes you're looking at it and going, that's a workaround for some problem that doesn't exist. You don't need this anymore. And part of modernizing is getting rid of all that wastage, that pointless extra business, because you want that one sort of vision forward, but you also need to be there sort of simplifying your business needs. You don't want it to be, yes, this is the, let's say, Helen feature, because it sends off these files for Helen to check, and then Helen puts it back on some drive somewhere which does that. Have a machine do that. Sometimes you don't need a person to sort of move things from A to B. The machine can do it. And just because the legacy machines needed it.
But even to your point there, Will, let's say that was put in place 5 years ago, right? There may have been a very good point that Helen needed to process that bit of data. But it's asking that question of why? 5 years later, why? Does that still need to be done? That sometimes we have to question our own designs, and often that takes quite a bit of humility. Sometimes the people in that room who are looking to, let's say, do a rebuild will be the original authors of the solution you are looking to potentially replace. And it takes a lot of humility to sit there and go, you know what, I know why we did it, but let's sit down and redesign for the future.
It's a really good point you guys make there as well, because it's an interesting thing that, obviously, considering it from an infrastructure perspective, it's kind of the same conversation, right? It's sometimes the biggest benefits when moving to cloud isn't necessarily choosing to rehost, it's actually choosing to replace it with existing solutions that maybe are already out there. So it's really interesting to hear it's kind of the same process from an application modernization side of it as well. And I guess on that note then, and I think you kind of touched on it briefly, Andrew, is if we're understanding this correctly, app modernization isn't necessarily a quick process. I mean, is there a kind of a typical period of time that you would normally allocate to an app modernization project? I suppose it depends on the pathway they choose, right? But
Yeah, it very much depends. I've worked with clients where their modernization has taken them all of a few months, and I've got another client who I still interact with, where we started this journey off pre-COVID, and they are still progressing through. But for them, what's so different is that this is their core business, right? It's all technology based. So if they were to just rip out and replace or refactor, it becomes very fragile and they could lose business. So what they've actually gone down the line of is going, you know what, we'll use for those who know, the strangler fig pattern. And what we'll do is we'll say, right, let's leave our legacy one there, right? And we'll slowly over time, we'll replace the business units of that solution in the value that we need it to. So, it might be the orders, it might be the basket, it might be how someone interacts with the front page. They will modernize the areas of the application, and they'll slowly replace it with the new, getting rid of the old. And so that one there, because it's such a core aspect to their business, they've chosen to do a multi-year modernization piece. But they're modernizing in a way that they still are able to keep the innovation. They're still able to look forward to the future. But the key aspect there is you can't stop maintaining the old, right? There's a very important facet there where as soon as you ignore the old to focus on the new, it just dies. Right, your old solution just becomes rigid, old, and if you are counting on that still for a period of time, people are going to start seeing security flaws. They're going to start seeing latencies and issues that you would normally have catered for because you were maintaining the solution. So, depending on what approach you take, you do have to be fairly hands-on.
Sure.
I think it also depends on your level of tech debt. It's if you've been trying to keep up a bit and have a relatively small bit of tech debt, your path might be quicker. If you have a huge amount of tech debt, you haven't moved off, let's say, .NET 3.6, you're going to have a bit of pain moving forward. And as Andrew said, there are coping mechanisms. The strangler fig pattern, or ship of Theseus, as I like to call it, where we just change out bits and pieces. It always depends on that. What's our business directive? What is the purpose of this change?
Absolutely. I usually go through around 3 steps when we're looking to figure out what path to take. And it starts off with assessing their business criticality, right? We look at the application, where the critical areas. We then evaluate the application's technical feasibility for each path. So i.e. that rehost, refactor, rebuild, or even do we just retire it or replace it? I mean, retirement is an option, guys. Like, if it's not giving you any business value, if no one can stand there and say that application actually delivers value, there is a good case to say, let's not use it. Let's retire it. And the third option is, the third step there is then to prioritize your modernization based on that return on investment and strategic alignment. This isn't just a technical facet anymore. Like we've been saying throughout, this is a tech to business collaboration. We have to collaborate. Our companies and organizations aren't, we're not just banks. We're not just the food grocer down the road. We're not just the florist. We have technical capabilities now. We're tech businesses. So it's making sure the alignment is there so we can deliver value.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so is that kind of collaboration or cooperation the only thing that you align modernization with to achieve business goals?
No, not particularly. So it's not just the collaboration, but it's making sure that there is the business case.
Mm.
So the collaboration brings the product, the IT, the business stakeholders, sorry, into the same room. The first point on that is do it early. There's no point coming up with your 3-step plan to modernize and then discuss it with the stakeholders. That conversation, the planning even needs to be done with everyone.
Sure.
But it comes with that next point, which is the business case, right? It's the tying the technical upgrades to measurable business outcomes. So things like reduced downtime. You know, how do we make sure that, if we come back to the point of you running this on your own on-premise infrastructure, there's costs, there's the management of, if we're talking about the reduced downtime, if there were to be downtime, that's getting someone out to the premises to manage and get it back up and running. You could move that to the cloud, and you could have resiliency put in place so that becomes seconds rather than hours. There's measurable aspects that can be put in place there. But as I mentioned before, there's an idea of that shared language. That's probably one of the most key outcomes of this, which is avoid the tech jargon. Focus on what the outcomes are for the business so that everyone can be championing the change.
100%.
If everyone's going off in different directions, it's going to fall flat, and you'll see it fairly quickly. It's that shared vision, and it usually takes someone to lead that. There needs to be a visionary within the organization to actually say, you know what, I'm going to champion this. I'm going to make sure that everyone comes aligned. Someone who can actually chair the meetings, as it were, to actually say, that was too technical, dumb it down for the rest of us. Or from the other side of the coin, actually there's a domain within. For instance, let's say this was a florist, right? We might need to actually talk a little bit about the flowers that we sell, so that the technical guys can actually understand that there is a point to why a particular feature needs to be developed the way that it does. And it's that shared understanding that it's perhaps in a nonchalant way dumbing it down for each other so that we can be aligned.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's often the sort of first thing that I say when talking to clients, right, is certainly from an infrastructure perspective, is it's having those specific cloud teams that, to your point, are championing what you're actually trying to achieve. So it's interesting to hear that's kind of paralleled, if you like, in terms of application modernization. It makes perfect sense. Well, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, as part of that, bringing people in, if your modernization is moving to the cloud, it's a very different financial structure to historic. Previously, you would, data center will have that server for 5-10 years, even more, and that will see us fine. We have this amount of capacity, and that's it. If we go over it, it's huge amounts of money. Whereas in the cloud world, it can vary wildly, and it's definitely a discussion with the financial teams to help them understand and build in those safeguards regarding if we get a huge surge in demand, be aware that the costs might suddenly spike a bit, and we have to sort of have a understanding and trust that these business objectives will be mitigating those cloud costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go from a hosting on-premise, right, you've bought a lot of the kit. Your costs usually lie within maintenance, but when you start moving things to the cloud, you're moving into a subscription model. I know you can also buy out set quotas and the like, so you do have a little bit of that understanding of how much you can spend every month. But yeah, it's, if you're going down a consumption point, your financial team don't really understand that. Telling them that it could cost them anywhere in the realms of X and Y, but you don't really know, it's a very difficult conversation to have. the financial teams want to know it's going to cost me X, full stop. So yes, there isn't necessarily an easy one on that. That's very much what is now being classed as sort of the FinOps practice.
Yeah.
But there's a whole another set of alignment that needs to be put in place for that. But also the co-ownership, right? Everyone, when you start moving across to this kind of a mechanism, there's an accountability that developers need to have, that the team leads need to have, that the product owners, the financial team, there's an alignment that needs to be put across all of that. But what's another really interesting point on the alignment is, and I've seen it in past, which is please avoid technology for technology's sake, or wouldn't it be cool if?
Yeah.
It's crashed and burned too many times, right? We've seen it where there's clients, for instance, that are needing tangible buttons. They think about a user interface, right? They're needing tangible buttons because they need to be focusing on their client or potentially the machinery that's at hand. So they need in their hands to do the muscle memory jobs of clicking buttons, doing whatever it needs to be done there, whilst they observe the outcomes, right? And there was one case where a team went in and said, you know what would be cool? We'll make it all touchscreen, and we'll have windows that just sort of move and interplay, and you can customize and do whatever you want. They thought it was brilliant, and to be fair, it was really innovative. But they put it in the hands of the users, and that muscle memory just disappeared. I mean, even if you put it in exactly the same layout, there was no touch. There was no capability of going, that's exactly where my fingers need to go. That muscle memory just disappeared completely. It became the biggest waste of money that ever was. But then how do you justify that to your stakeholders, right? They've just spent potentially millions on this new innovative idea, and it's fallen flat and it comes back down to that requirements aspect I was talking about earlier. If you don't work with everyone right at the start to go, this is what we're building and this is why we're doing it, aligning with the business objectives and the key stakeholders, it just falls flat. And you can create some solutions that you think are solving big problems, but they're really not. So it's just avoid the technology for technology's sake. Avoid the wouldn't it be cool if.
Absolutely. And I guess from my perspective, there seems to be now more than ever, certainly when it comes to kind of developing applications for cloud, that there's more of a blend, and you kind of touched on it in your last comments, a blend between developers and maybe front end staff, or even IT admins, or possibly even support. So I guess from your perspective, what kind of cultural or operational shifts are needed for success? Is there anything else that you can think of that would be needed?
It certainly is a mind shift. It's a mindset shift. It really is. There's an element, and we used to have it with BizTalk. For those who know BizTalk, there was an alignment that used to be put in place where you could say this is the business flow. So let's say there was a flow of outcomes. Let's say sales. Someone's bought product X. It's been moved over to the factory. Then from the factory, it went somewhere else. You've got a whole flow, right? That's obviously represented from a technical point because you'll have orchestrated that flow. But there's a cultural shift there that just because I build it from a technology point, that if I were to hand that over to support or to someone else, they'd be able to look at that and go, oh yeah, because it got stuck there in said pipeline, I know exactly how to resolve that. Again, they don't. It comes back to that. They're different domains, but we are ever so closely entwined now. And so actually having that ability to go, there's a cross correlation together. If you got stuck at this point, this is what it means from a business point of view. But there's also the point of view of, I'm not building a solution that's one size fits all. It's changing that mindset to go, I'm delivering innovation that can be built on top of. Will, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been talking all the way through this that it needs to be directed from leadership down, communicating through, but it's also blending these teams together. You can't have your dev team do work for 6 months, then pass it off to your test team to do a good 3-month blast through it, because by that time, the cloud bits might have been rapidly gone through. So you need a greater integration between your teams, which is a huge sort of communication difference there. You're going to be needing to include a lot more people in sort of your conversations, because there are more stakeholders the quicker you have to move forward. You can't take a slower approach anymore. I mean, we talked about the changing in finances. That's going to be a big cultural shift, where you're changing your billing to monthly rather than paying upfront for a huge amount of resource. So, and it's thought processes. It's the communication is always the hardest bit in any app modernization, because you have to translate from user to from user, leadership, and developer, and meet with that happy medium where you can get that high quality changes that will drive business growth that the users actually want.
Yeah, and another interesting point, just coming out from an experience aspect, is a cultural mindset shift on how to do development. Sam, you mentioned it there earlier, which was, if you've always developed in a certain way for on-premise, but now you have to develop for the cloud, that can be quite different. I had it the ones where effectively it was a Windows service that used to be developed, but then it became we'll run that as an Azure function. But that Azure function was backed by something like Azure API management as a reverse proxy. Now, what that meant was, for me to invoke that function app now, I have to go through Azure API management. I can't just invoke the function app directly, because I've put security measures in, access controls, and all the like. So the method of me developing, invoking, and testing that solution has wildly changed. And what it meant was, actually some of the developers were almost, if I can air quote, revolting, because they couldn't just interact with it the way they used to. And so there is a developer mindset that goes, you're going to have to learn. You're going to have to change. You're going to have to move with the times. The ways of old won't necessarily be the ways of the new. And it doesn't mean that the underlying principles have necessarily changed. It's just that the hosting, the way of interaction will have changed, but for the better, right? Moving from that Windows service that you got there to something that's running as Azure function has given you a ton of flexibility and scalability. And so there's elements to celebrate, and there's elements to go, you have to learn. We have to.
Jumping in on that, it's also, developers now need to be more considerate of costs. It's no more can you just spin up a new web service, because if you're doing that in the cloud, that's a good 3 or 4 new cloud things. Or let's say you had a VM that was, you just set up the maximum sizes on premise because, you've already paid for that resource. Who cares? In the cloud, that can be quite dangerous, especially if you forget about it and just leave it running.
Yeah, and I guess that just kind of on that point, that's where aligning a really strong FinOps process comes into its own, right? Because it's more about understanding, or rather not actually tightening the purse strings, but just having controls put in place that you actually understand where costs are being driven from, so you can make educated choices. And certainly that is one area that I think businesses have to make quite a major shift when it comes to adopting cloud and modernizing their technology for the cloud, is that kind of FinOps mindset, and blending those two things together.
100%.
Absolutely. And that is as much a cultural change as it is tooling. The tooling enables, but FinOps practice is a way of working. The tool just enables. So that we're not necessarily getting into that today, but it's in the realm of mind shifts. That is definitely one to watch out for and be looking at right at the start.
Sure. So, I mean, we've talked quite a bit in terms of the entry points or the considerations, if you like, for app modernization. But I guess one key thing that a lot of our listeners will probably be kind of wondering is how would they go about measuring the return of investment for modernization, probably so that they can deliver that back to key stakeholders within the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, a return on investment is more than just cost savings. It's speed, it's reliability, it's customer satisfaction, it's strategic enablement. There's so many measurable outcomes, and it will differentiate depending on what your application is trying to deliver, right? If there is no customer element to it, as in like a UI or something like that, then that might not be a metric that you're looking at, but it might be the speed in delivery. So what you have to look at is what are the metrics that will enable me to show that I've successfully modernized. And I know that's quite airy-fairy there, but it is very much going down the lines of, is speed imperative to me? Is reliability imperative to me? If this is my mechanism, if you're thinking of like an e-commerce site, their ability to navigate your site, add items to that basket, and get as quickly to a point of sale, that's imperative. So you're looking at both speed, reliability, the fact that they can come and go away and then come back to their basket and continue, the ability that they can find everything on your site really quickly. Those are metrics that you can measure and derive, I made changes and therefore impacted. But the key aspect isn't just measuring the thing that you make, it's actually measuring the thing you already have. You can't go to your stakeholders and say, we delivered excellence because we measured our customer experience and it's looking really good. What they want to see is that based on where we were to now, it's increased by X amount. They want to know that we've invested wisely. And so there's a few areas to consider. There's the short term. There's the short term points of, well, let's reduce the infrastructure costs. Let's look for faster deployments, fewer outages, for instance. Those are things that you can do quite quickly in the short term. In the midterm, it's then looking at features to things like your customer metrics. How in that e-commerce scenario there, how can we enable fewer clicks, fewer navigation points to define what I need to purchase? For the longer term, you're looking at the increased agility, new revenue streams. That fits in alongside that point of innovation. Am I putting my application in a point that it's stable? I'm not saying that anyone will ever get to a point of there's no technical debt. I think that's very wishful thinking. But it's been in a position that it's not crippling you. You need an application that allows you to be able to design for the future, not cater for the past.
Yeah, sure. And I think even from like conversations and engagements that I've seen as well, is sometimes that can even be, not just aligned to a product, but maybe even in terms of like insights that can be driven through your application, maybe data that it's holding is actually being able to access that and having all parties access that in a meaningful and quick manner, right? So, yeah.
100%, because we're in a wonderful world of data right now. It's just selecting the right questions to ask is always the hardest bit. And so I think with how do you measure the rate of investment, return on investment of modernization, you need to know where you are now. Because if you don't know where you are, how do you know where you're going? And
Well, the other interesting one, Will, and I'll throw it to you as a question, but it's should your return on investment include risk avoidance, metrics like security posture?
oh, absolutely. I mean, we're in a increasingly digital world, and I mean, just recently we saw the Co-op and M&S, huge attacks there, and both took different strategies on how they dealt with it. Co-op pulled the plug immediately and took that short-term loss, whereas M&S, I believe, is still dealing with some of the remnants of that attack. So you're being able to be more secure can save you a lot of money from any of these attacks. Or rather than a sort of hacker security view, it's a compliance view. A GDPR breach can be hideously expensive for your business. I believe it's 2% of your profit per day you're out of compliance, which
It's huge.
Yeah, if you can spot those early or avoid those from happening, you've saved this investment.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point, right? Especially nowadays where compliance and security moves at a rapid pace. And I think it's from my perspective, is documenting not just the journey of modernization from an application perspective, but also documenting the journey from an infrastructure perspective as well, and aligning those two conversations and making sure that governance is kind of, I suppose, holistically deployed for both ends of those spectrums simultaneously, so you don't have problems further down the line. Okay, so I mean, we've kind of gone roundabout and got to, I suppose, the end of understanding our journey in terms of app modernization. We've had quite a few examples already, but I'm just wondering if there's any other real world examples or lessons learned or potential pitfalls maybe that you could share with our listeners, just stories for a modernization journey.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got quite a number, but the one that I'd probably share, just because it would be the quickest point to failure, is that collaborative exercise right at the beginning. We worked with a client quite a while back now, that, we ran a workshop with them, and that was the first time that they had all of those people in a room talking to each other in years. Now, if that doesn't speak about their ability to run as an organization, never mind build a solution for the future. I know that's quite a radical point there, but it's, for them, that was a reality. They had teams across many regions within the UK, and effectively they couldn't regularly get people into a room, never mind agree. And so what it often meant was that someone needed to stand up as the visionary. Someone had to stand up as the chair for progress and go, actually, we will meet. We will have these conversations. We will make sure that it is productive, but with a driving force for change, right? And that was probably one of the most pivotal pieces, was that once they were in the room collaborating, they got so excited. They saw the art of the possible. They were like, this is incredible. We can do this, guys. Like this thing that's been crippling us for 10 plus years, you can get rid of it. And for them, it very much was a case for a rebuild. But being able to stand there and go, I can see it. And that's half the problem. Can you see it? Can you stand there and see the end goal? And it might just be a piece that you stand there with guys and you go, right, this is the art of the possible. Let's take our eyes off what is, where we were, and let's go forward. Let's look at what could be, not just necessarily the things that are crippling us. That's one particular example, Will, I don't know if you've got another that you want to share.
Yeah, I think I'm going to share one where it shows that it's not just the app that is being modernized. Sometimes a change to your process can be a huge change to your business processes and give you a great advantage there. So we had a customer who had a load of factories, and it took them, I think it was 6 weeks to deploy out any changes. We worked with them in modernizing their processes to get them onto the factory floor, so their testing processes, their DevOps processes. This change meant they could deploy changes within 2 days, which, if you think, say they had a problem with one of their robots for 6 weeks, think of the revenue loss there that is now being fixed by that quicker deploy process. So it's not always all about the application. Sometimes it's about how you're running things.
Yeah, it's that agility, isn't it, Will?
Yep.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, both of you. And I think that brings us to the end of our episode, and brings it to a nice close. So I'd like to thank both Andrew and William for joining us today. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We have actually covered quite a lot about app modernization. I did actually find particularly interesting the kind of the parallel alignment between essentially app modernization and infrastructure modernization, which was quite interesting from my area of specialism. So to those listening, you may not know, but Grey Matter is actually focused on helping developers and SaaS companies solve challenges and to succeed with tech. So as a software and a cloud solution provider, it was a no-brainer for us actually to partner with Black Marble. They do develop solutions right across the Microsoft platform, from custom developed software, BizTalk and cloud integration solutions, which we've had them talk a little bit about as well, right the way through to the DevOps consultancy piece. I'm wondering whether or not William, Andrew, do you want to just add a little bit about Black Marble on the end here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you said this, and we work across many facets, whether that's the cloud migration, integration architectures, the full stack modernization, as you were just referring there. We're a software development house at heart, so we can aid in the design and delivery, and as you said, the same way we're a joined up approach to help you move faster, smarter, and certainly with more confidence.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, certainly when it comes to looking after our clients, I know that they come to us certainly for infrastructure expertise. So it's nice for us to be able to showcase that from a development perspective, they got similar expertise in Black Marble's hands as well. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. If you do have any more questions for me or the Black Marble team, please do email. It's info@greymatter.com. We will also be covering GitHub in an upcoming episode on this podcast as well, so make sure to subscribe so you don't actually miss out on that and other great episodes that we have lined up with experts from across the tech world. Bye for now.